So hi everyone, I am Nikita. I lead the machine learned ranking team for search for product search at Walmart Labs. So if you've ever gone to walmart.com and typed in a query and seen the results for items, it's mostly coming from my team. My career in general has been mostly in e-commerce. I've been at Walmart for about 5 years now. Before this, I was at a startup called Atchemy, which actually Walmart acquired down the line, which was again in the sponsored search space. So when you saw ads on Google, probably Atchemy had some share of that. And previous to that, I was at Amazon, again in e-commerce, working in a different area, but again in machine learning on fraud detection. So yeah, my journey into data science has been through, people come to data science from different aspects, and the way I arrived at data science was through software engineering to begin with, and then also, I had taken graduate coursework in machine learning and done research, and that's how I ended up in data science. Yeah, so here today, I'm here to talk about something very interesting and different from data science, but something which is very important in our day-to-day lives, which is how to listen better. Oh, what happened? Did I? Okay, no wonder. Okay, so there's a famous quote by Sir Winston Churchill which says, "It takes courage to stand up and speak. It also takes courage to sit down and listen." In a world where we are constantly told, to speak up, and there's social media, you share so many things, there is constant information that is being thrown at you. There's so much data out there. And increasingly, what people have learned to do is to ignore things that are not important, or focus on on the essential things that they want to take away. And interestingly, while there are so many speeches about how to become a better communicator and how to become a better speaker, there are not as many talks about listening. And listening actually is a very important part of any conversation. There's a famous story about, there's an old fable about a tree which fell in a forest, and the question is that if a tree falls in a forest, if there was no one there to hear the tree fall, would it still be considered that the tree actually made any sound while falling? Similarly, in a conversation, if there is not a good listener, do you think the conversation would be a good one? Would the communication be effective? Would a speaker ever be able to communicate what they were trying to communicate if the other person never listened? So this is a very important skill which we as human beings, and particularly as technologists, have to invest in, because as you will see down in my talk, I'll specifically look at it from the lens of technology. So today I'll be talking about 3 things. One is, how is listening different from hearing? Why is listening important to begin with? And how, and most importantly, how to become a better listener. Okay, so how is listening different from hearing? So hearing is hearing is the faculty of perceiving sound, right? So whenever you perceive some kind of sound, you are hearing. But listening is something more. Listening is what you make out of that sound. So what did you actually understand from what you heard? And what you take away then becomes the basis of how you respond. And that is why it's so important to be able to understand and listen, because that becomes the grounding on which you then act upon. Now, there are multiple cases, like, so here, yeah. So hearing, and then there's other aspects of listening which is not just related to sound. For instance, if I were to ask you, any of you today, how was your day? And if you were to answer saying, it was good, it was good. Versus if you were to say, it was good. The very tone in which the sound was delivered and the body language has a lot more, you're getting a lot more from the tone and the body language than just the actual content of what I just said, right? So it's very, so listening also is not just the sound, it's also about the hidden cues, the subtle cues which go in terms of your conversation as well as anything that you hear around you. Now, why is listening important? I did mention that to have a good conversation, listening is important. But listening is very, very important, especially in terms of technology. And let me speak to that. So I remember when I was back in school and college, when first time you're hearing about anything to do with, like, first time you're being presented computer science concepts, or first time you are even learning about machine learning. When I started my undergrad, interestingly, I majored in economics and computer engineering, and I had no clue that they would intersect later down the line in a field called data science, which is, again, like, a lot of people come from statistics background, from computer science background, and different backgrounds. I had no idea that there was even a field called machine learning back then. But during my undergrad, when all these concepts were being presented for the first time, frankly speaking, it was overwhelming. It was very overwhelming to be hearing all of this technical jargon and trying to make sense of it. And the way I could make sense of it was by listening. So really leaning in, giving an ear to what was being said. And when I say what was being said, the concepts that were being presented, looking at them not just from the lens of just getting the, so what does it mean to understand a concept? That means that you understand what are the assumptions behind the concept, right? Like, what is it trying to solve? And if there is a problem that you are trying to solve, how is the problem broken down? There are multiple ways that you can solve problems. And specifically in computer science, one thing that I found out very quickly is there is an efficient way, and then there is an inefficient way. And how do you train your mind to think efficiently, right? And this comes up all the time. Every time you go to an interview and you're asked a coding question, you're asked to break a problem down. And the way you break a problem down, having done countless interviews myself, and it's very interesting because when you interview folks, you see different ways of thinking, like different ways where the same problem is solved by different people. And that, I think, is a great example of how different people bring different perspectives also to, like, problem solving. But one thing that remains is that for you to learn a better way than your current thinking or take your thinking to the next level, you have to understand how a person thinks. And to that, you have to observe and you have to listen. So I remember back then when learning algorithms for the first time, listening to my professor, seeing how she broke down the problem, and having this repeating in almost every technical course of mine. As I started my career as a software engineer and as a data scientist, I found this skill coming very handy, and I found this pattern repeating again and again. When it came to, so specifically when it comes to data science, right, there is a lot of data, but the insights or what you take away from the data really comes from the questions you ask. And the questions you ask, the way a person solves a problem, be it coding, be it data science, be it any technology, the way you innovate, the questions you ask determine what you innovate. There is a famous quote by Tony Robbins which says, "The quality of your questions determines the quality of your life." I'll just pause there a bit so that people can really read this. It's a very powerful quote. What kind of questions you are asking determines the quality of your life. And this is true in every aspect. Asking the right question almost always has a big role in the answer that you arrive at. And people who are innovators and people even in academia, people who do groundbreaking research, one of the key things they are good at is phrasing the right question. In fact, in a PhD program, for instance, a lot of time is spent in just figuring out what should be the right question to ask. And then of course, comes the part where you're actually trying to solve that problem. Right? So how do you get better at improving the quality of the questions you ask? The way you improve the quality of the questions you ask is through listening. By listening to what kind of questions are others asking. Why did they ask this question and not something else? There is no such thing as a stupid question. It is true. There is no such thing as a stupid question. In fact, one should ask and be able to, the best way you can pick up a way of thinking which is not coming naturally to you is by seeing that what were the questions this person asked which I did not ask, and then why did they ask this question and not what I am asking. So I would really encourage you to do this actively. It will help you grow technically big time. This is one of the things that is very important, and it really helps you become a better innovator. Now, interestingly, as I observed, the kind of questions I asked in my about 9 years of career right now, the kind of questions I was asking when I started out as an engineer or a data scientist versus then when I started taking on bigger projects, becoming a lead, and then later on as a manager, I found that my questions actually became simpler. They were, I started out with asking very complicated questions, and as I progressed in my career, I started asking simpler questions, more fundamental questions, questions which did not require, which required you to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And this is something which didn't come naturally to me for sure, but this is something I was able to pick up by listening and observing the people around me and how other senior folks on my team, as well as other peers, how they thought through problems. So, going back, so I hope this shows you that listening is so important, not only to develop yourself technically. Obviously, as a conversations are something that we have on a daily basis, and it is an integral part of our lives. And if you've had a conversation where you feel you've been heard, it's such a beautiful thing, and it also has a healing capability. So I hope that if you bring your listening to these conversations, that will help you appreciate listening more. Now, how do you become a better listener? Interestingly, the answer to this comes from listening to yourself. So, how do you start listening to yourself? So, in this world where there are so many distractions, take a few minutes, just 3 minutes in a day, to simply sit in a place where you're not distracted and just pay attention to just yourself, your breath, just being mindful. Those 3 minutes of mindfulness allow you to cue in to how you are feeling, your body, what is going on in your body and your sensations and your emotions. Our emotions are so attached to how we think and how we reflect on things, right? And just taking that time for yourself will help you become self-aware. The other way that, so that's the very first step of becoming a better listener, being mindful. Having empathy for the person you are, for the person you are listening, being able to being able to hear out the other person without being judgmental, without getting into a conversation, without trying to find cues which will just, confirm your assumptions, but going into a conversation with an open mind. That is also very crucial. And having mindfulness, empathy, and actively listening can make you a better listener. By active listening, I mean clarifying, right? When you are being presented all these technical concepts and you're doing problem solving, a key aspect of it is to make sure you understood the other person correctly. So active listening involves like asking the other person, clarifying, did I understand this correctly? Is this what you meant? Right? And then building upon what they have said. And all of these things, mindfulness, empathy, and active listening, can certainly make all of us better listeners. And I invite all of you to become better listeners and make the world a better place. Thank you.